think I got it together here. Okay, hey, welcome everybody to the SR 85 Quarter Policy Advisory Board meeting today. We have a quorum, so we could take a roll call, please.
Member Waterman?
Here.
Member Spinks?
Here.
Member Bruin? Here. Member Saya? Alternate Member Jensen? Member Turner? Alternate Member Craig? Member Jimenez? Member Klein? Alternate Member Melvin?
Here.
Vice Chairperson Miller?
Here.
Chairperson McAllister?
Here.
Alternate Member, ex officio Member Sartini? Alternate ex officio Member Gilman?
Okay, excellent. Government doesn't stop for anybody. Okay, now we will go to public presentations, or this is actually the public opportunity to speak, and we have 3 cards that would like to take this opportunity. We'll have Roland, then Jim, then Connie. So if you could come up that particular order. You have 2 minutes, and love to hear from you.
Thank you. So I was at the SSTP&O last week, and I was looking at the ridership numbers, and I looked at the 185, and the load factor was 17.5%, and the target 60%, so it's a problem. So I spent probably half a day this weekend to study how a private company called King's Ferry basically provides a similar service and actually manages to be profitable in the process. And what I did is I discovered a completely different stopping pattern that provides essentially first and last mile and a single seat ride. And the way they do it is they run multiple bus lines, but each one of these bus lines, so the bus lines are the 719, the 720, the 21, and the 22. I actually discovered them through Google. And what they do is they, on the origination, they basically hit an entire neighborhood in a circling pattern. They make about 20 stops in 30 minutes, and then boom, they hit the freeway. They have a couple of stops on the way on the freeway, and then they hit London, and they repeat. Same thing, boom, 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 and that's how you get the door-to-door one-seat ride. They do this for half the price of rail, and they guarantee you a seat. You got Wi-Fi. It's very attractive. My neighbors use it. This is how I discovered it. If you want to see what the stopping pattern is, there's an app in UK called Movit, movit.co.uk, and you type the bus line, and boom, 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 you're going to see where the stops are geographically speaking. Now, going back to 185, a similar solution could be, do you have time here? Similar solution could be to have multiple stops in Gilroy, probably like 10, and then hit the freeway and forget about Morgan Hill. Run another line from Morgan Hill that would do similarly, just go around Morgan Hill, picking up people, boom, hitting the freeway, and then I have a feeder from San Martin using 68. Thank you.
Wrap up. Thank you.
Hi, Jim Stallman. I live in Saratoga. Had 3 comments for this morning. One, that was a very impressive report and study, outreach that VTA did for 280. And point 2, I plead with you to ask for the same thing. It was done pretty much in-house. It's not an extra charge. Do one of those, just fix the freeway kind of reports and outreach to the public. There's lots of good ideas, opportunities. Dan isn't here this morning. That's something normally Caltrans might look at, but I think they think we're going to be doing all of that for ourselves. So please try to get one of those things going. The transit guideway thing is rather focused on just the light rail or transit bus or whatever, and we need a big picture, and we could do that in parallel. Third, your comments on connecting Lawrence Expressway to 85 at the last meeting. Another appeal, please make sure that Saratoga Avenue interchange gets first-rate access to the hot lanes because of Lawrence Expressway and because of West Valley College, tremendous trip generator. It's pointless to sit on the freeway for a mile before you can get into the hot lane. So there needs to be, and the proposal on the VTA website doesn't show that. So please fix that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe Connie?
Good morning. I want to compliment the process that we're using for getting input from the public. My input is, one, I want to urge that the study continue to be funded in spite of the court case that's ongoing. I understand that that somehow is holding up or could potentially hold up the case, and I would urge you to urge them to continue to fund the study as it goes forward. I personally would support the light rail function. It's something that it would be an extra option as opposed to, say, the Flex Track Express Lane. I also would support a bus rapid transit. When I was reading about that, however, I discovered that at least one comment article about it was that a problem with the bus rapid transit is that it is more easily eroded budget-wise through time. So if that's the case, and I'm not sure that I'm qualified to say that, but I would certainly support the light rail if that is the case. I don't support Flex Tracks at all. I have taken Flex Track, the express rail on 6-8, not rail, sorry. Whatever it is, lane, over there on 680 coming south, and sometimes when it's $1 or 50 cents or something, it might be worth it. But I was taking it one time recently, and it was $6, and it was absolutely no gain. I mean, you paid your $6, but you didn't go faster. So that I see is not useful. Talking to my son-in-law, who does commute every day, he said that has happened to him as well. It's just not it's just not appropriate for our 85, which has space to put in a light rail. I thought the Mountain View City Council had some interesting ideas about automating and also about aerial. Maybe that particularly, the aerial might be particularly good for the area that's only 20 feet wide for the 85 corridor. So I appreciate all your time, and I really hope that you do a complete study on all the options. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. We appreciate those shout out for Mountain View. Okay, Raphael? No, I'm from Mountain View, so you called out Mountain View for thinking. Not to say the other cities don't think, but.
Oh, okay.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
So I'm a representative of Transition De Anza, a transition advocacy group on De Anza College. And we're here today with the support of students and faculty from various local colleges concerned about the VTA's prospective developments to Highway 85. We feel that the student voice hasn't been very well represented in the dialogue regarding the highway. The developments that occur in the corridor are going to set the tone for decades of infrastructure proposals to come. As part of the youth who will grow up to use this same highway for that period, we want to ensure that whatever developments occur are sustainable and will benefit the most number of people. So the results from the first round of VTA surveys indicated that several of your constituents would like to see more lanes along the corridor, but we believe that the better option to consider is to promote public transportation by developing infrastructure that supports as such. We surveyed students at De Anza College, West Valley, and Foothill, and found that of those who use the corridor, people would want to see either a light rail system, an express bus lane, or an express bus / carpool lane. An overwhelming number of students, whether or not they used Highway 85, supported the installation of public transportation on the highway. We understand that the financial constraints might limit the VTA as a body, but we believe that there are public transit alternatives that don't really require costly infrastructure expansion. And if we want to foster a cultural shift in the way we develop and utilize transportation, we need to take the first steps in directing the kind of transportation we want to invest in. The future of public transportation, and the future is in public transportation and smart infrastructure developments. There's only going to be so much serviceable space around the highway, and we want to make sure that it's utilized in a manner that will last for generations. On behalf of the students you represent in your districts, we ask that you seriously consider these points as provided by valued members of your constituency. Your decisions will bear a significant weight on students, the community, and the future of transportation. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Do you know that this committee's been working for 3 years? And so when you said that we haven't had your input, so were you aware that we've been working for 3 years?
Yes, it just so happens that for community college students, it's not very so often that you'll find a group that works dedicatedly on this because of the two-year college thing where people who work on this will eventually transition out. And a lot, as far as I know, the next round of surveys is also going to be presented when we have summer and during our De Anza summer quarter. So for this input, we wanted this to encompass the whole year's worth of it.
And the survey is done through the college?
Yes, we created our own survey and we spread it out through De Anza College, West Valley, and Foothill, where through their associated student bodies, I'm also part of student government, so we have access to it.
So your survey represents 3 colleges?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Good. Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much.
So just one comment.
Sure.
Raphael, I think all of us up here would love to see your survey. You know, the VTA has done its own outreach, but I think we would be well informed. So if you reach out to any of us, we can make sure that it gets through staff to all of the folks that sit here.
For sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
And we have Ashley who'd like to speak.
Good morning, and thank you for letting me share my experience with the VTA. On behalf of, I come from Transition, the same organization that Raphael has came from. My name is Ashley Jaja, and I'm an international student from De Anza, here to speak on behalf of the international students in De Anza. As in De Anza, our population consists of 30% international students, and they heavily rely on the VTA as their main form of transportation because most international students are unable to get personal transportation. So we heavily rely on the VTA to get around to the colleges that we go to or to travel around for recreational purposes. I would just like to express my gratitude to the VTA for partnering up with De Anza and Foothill to form the EcoPass that makes the Clipper cards more affordable for all of us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for coming. Appreciate your comments. Okay? Seeing no, does anybody else like to take the opportunity to discuss any item that is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to the next item. And that will be orders of the day. Do we see anybody wants to change? Or we'll accept the orders of the day? Okay. Do we need a motion on the orders today? Nope, okay, we'll move on to that. And then we will receive committee staff report.
I just have a few brief remarks. I'd just like to say that on the regular schedule of this study proceeding, this would have been the meeting where we would have begun engaging you in the alternatives analysis, but since the second phase is not funded currently, we're going to engage you in answering a lot of the questions that the committee's had over the last few months. So the focus of this meeting is really responding to a lot of questions that the committee has offered staff over the last few months, and hopefully this will be something that will be, it'll set us up well for when we do go into the next phase of the study.
Okay.
So that concludes my remarks.
Okay. Question. Now, we have a couple of items here that are informational. So does it work? If we wanted to take any kind of action, we would have to agendize an action item, like item number 8, if we wanted to make an action item or recommendation, or would we be able to do that today?
It would be somewhat challenging to do that, Mr. Chairman, but we could certainly agendize it as an action item for your next meeting.
Okay. Well, we can still make recommendations, but we can't take.
You could absolutely make recommendations which would help to inform the staff report as it comes back as an action item.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we will go on to the consent calendar. We have 2 items. Are there any corrections to the, are there any items that the panel would like to pull for discussion, or anybody from the public would like to pull any action items for discussions concerning the meetings? Minutes?
Mr. Chairman, these items are the minutes of your meetings in November and December, and staff would be happy to take any comments or changes that you might recommend.
Okay.
I move the consent calendar.
Okay, seeing no public comment, we'll go to motion. Thank you.
Second?
Second, okay, motion second. made by Howard Miller, seconded by Rod Sinks. Okay. Any discussion, comments? Okay, vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, 5 and 6 have been passed. Now we will go to the regular agenda item, and we will start with item number 7, and we will have a staff report.
Okay, so this is sort of a standing item on our committee. Each meeting we try to explain where we are in the study process, remind the Policy Advisory Board what their role is in the various actions coming ahead of them. I'll note that the next 3 agenda items are all linked by the continuing Measure B lawsuit, so we may want to think of them all as one.
Could everybody hear him? If not, could you also write that?
Is that
Yeah.
better?
I hate to
Mr.
see you
Chairman, I'd
hunch,
just like
but,
to say, this is Adam Berger. He's the project manager for this study.
Okay.
And he'll be doing all the items this day.
oh, he'll be doing all items? Okay. Yeah, what's Cupertino here?
Okay,
Is it working?
I think so. Can everyone
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah, we
I
got a
just
little
want,
bit.
I want to make sure that the video staff is also getting Adam's input here, because we're recording the meeting.
We're good.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.
Okay,
So you just have to be real direct into that mic.
I'll
Thank you,
talk
Adam.
right at the microphone.
Thank you.
So,
Appreciate it.
this is a somewhat of a standing item for this Policy Advisory Board. When we start each meeting, we remind ourselves where we are in the process, as well as what the Policy Advisory Board members' roles are as we work through this. I'll note that this item, as well as the next 2 items, are all linked by the Measure B lawsuit. Just our study has basically 4 main components. The first of them is Task 1. We are nearing completion of that today. That is to help the PAB get a good understanding of the travel market, the constraints that may constrain our corridor, and potential impacts in terms of space for building a bus or light rail or other type project in the corridor. Our second task will be to come up with a series of alternatives that will be developed by staff and the Policy Advisory Board working together. And then the third task is to go and do a deep dive, do some analysis on all of the alternatives that we decide we want to study. Ultimately, the Policy Advisory Board will review the alternatives analysis document that compares all of the different alternatives through a series of cost and performance metrics, as well as some analysis of feasibility issues, and make a recommendation to the Board of Directors. We will be doing a second round of outreach after Task 3 is complete, and that will inform the recommendation that the Policy Advisory Board makes. In the past, some members of the Policy Advisory Board have asked what all goes into the alternatives analysis. You have in your packet, for those in the audience, and I think loose for those on the board, an attachment that is one of many attachment A's, but it has a blue title at the top that gives you a sense for all of the components we would look for in a standard alternatives analysis, and we can add more to that if we choose. So I'll pause here for some questions on this item. If not, I'll move ahead to the next related item.
Any questions from council?
So I think we're completing Task 1, or Phase 1, and what we're not able to continue to do is move to Task 2, as we had planned to do today.
Right. And that
Okay.
is
In soliciting input from us about potential modes and things, right?
correct.
Okay. So just so, yeah, so we're clear, we're finishing Task 1. As we read in the next item, by April, it'll be done, and then we're on hold.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Director Bruins? It's up here. It's around, push to mute. Push.
Okay, is that microphone on now? Yeah. Okay, I don't know. With the cords over here and the buttons over here, you guys. Cupertino. Yeah, I just had one question. In this, we did, we looked at the travel market. We did a survey, okay? And one of the statements in the staff report says the survey also revealed that respondents are quite time sensitive and envision accessing SR 85 transit stations using automobiles, suggesting that the potential transit services must be fast and accommodate vehicle parking. So I guess the question that I have, when we do those kinds of surveys, taking into account that a lot of people who are taking these kinds of surveys are wedded to our automobiles, how much credence do we end up putting on those kinds of statements versus saying, yes, that dealt with one class of writers, but there's still others out there.
Yeah, and we had discussed this item at earlier PAB meetings. I noted that people responding to the survey were likely imagining their own transit solution when they filled that out. When we get to our second round of outreach, where we actually say, these are the alternatives we're evaluating and these are the time metrics, I expect that the feedback we get will be a lot more, should I say, not trustable, but we can get a better sense of it. I also noted in previous meetings that the high rate of accessing stations by vehicle is anomalous with the rest of how people access VTA system. We have about 80 to 90% of our riders arriving by foot or transferring from another transit vehicle, with really park and rides being the major exception. So though this is a commute type service, that seemed like a very high percentage expectation for automobile access.
Okay, thanks.
What is the estimated cost for task 2?
I think that would be in the $200,000 to $300,000 range.
And do we have an idea what task 3 would be?
That is probably closer to 800,000.
And the VTA board authorized 400,000 transferred from Measure A to get us going, correct?
Correct. Our contract with CDM Smith to do a lot of this work is $1.6 million. That's divided into the 3 tasks. The first of them was estimated to cost $400,000, and that's what the board approved using Measure A funds for.
Okay. And so we don't expect, depending on how Measure B goes, we don't expect to see an end of this study until the end of 2019, possibly?
That's getting into the next item, but...
Well, that's funding, I know. Okay, I was just looking at it.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Do we have any, so I do have a couple of comment cards on item 7. Roberta, sorry, and then followed by Roland for this item. Public input for number 7. And if anybody else would like to talk on item 7, fill out a blue card and hand it to our board secretary.
Good morning. I'm Roberta Holloman. I'm the chair of the Council of the Leagues of Women Voters of Santa Clara County. I'm speaking for the 5 leagues in Santa Clara County. First, I want to give you a little bit of background. The Leagues of Women Voters endorsed Measure B in 2016. The league spent significant time both educating the citizens of Santa Clara County on and advocating for the passage of Measure B. We spent substantial time in various forums explaining the components of Measure B, and in particular addressing the many questions that arose concerning BART. There was a significant concern that BART would consume all available funds. To that concern, we explained that the investment in BART was capped at 25% of the total program revenues. Further, we discussed the many other items that were covered by Measure B, such as local road improvement, the I-85 corridor, bus, and light rail. I'm here today to address the proposed pause on work on the study for 85, and want to share a rising concern that despite the safeguards of Measure B, that BART will consume all available funds or potentially will be preferred in terms of timing to the detriment of other elements of Measure B. The various projects covered by Measure B were intended to be developed in parallel, not sequentially. It is important for the fair treatment of all parts of Santa Clara County that no single project within Measure B be deferred in order to benefit or accelerate the BART expansion. I understand that we have to wait till this is agendized before you can make a decision on it, but I today encourage you to stick with both the letter and the spirit of Measure B. Do not pause the work on the study, and I'll be back at your next meeting. Thank you very much.
So this was sort of a funding issue, but we're going to be talking about funding at the next item, but we appreciate your comments. And I think
through the chair.
Yeah.
Let me ask staff, are you going to be addressing this in the next item, or?
If I may, I think it's appropriate to address it at this point with the chair's permission.
Thank you.
Ms. Holman, thank you very much for your comments. They are deeply appreciated, as is your representation on the Measure B Oversight Committee. The challenge that we have is that the Measure B funds are not available at this point. No Measure B funds are being expended on the BART project. Those are Measure A funds that are being utilized along with state and federal funds for that purpose. In terms of sequencing, this project has gone ahead using funds that were available at that point. So we are doing our best to make sure that all of the projects are moved forward. We have a real constraint in terms of our ability to expend Measure B funding. And as I say, we have looked under the couch cushions for money for this one, and we've been successful to this point. Unfortunately, we're just reaching a point where we don't have additional funds available for this project. But please be assured, the letter of the law in Measure B will be honored, and that is staff's intent as informed by the Board of Directors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So if I may add to that, just to make it very clear to everybody, 0 Measure B dollars can be expended for anything. So even all the cities, all of our jurisdictions who are expecting Measure B dollars for potholes, none of us can see a dime of this. Legally, all Measure B monies that is being collected are held in an escrow and cannot be expended on any project whatsoever. So it's not something that's just happening to SR 85 or any one thing. $0 legally can be expended until the resolution of the lawsuit. So we're all basically in a hostage situation. And again, as Mr. Lawson has stated, and I'm also a member of the board, as is Chair McAllister, VTA is trying to figure out where there might be other monies, as he said, I think looking under cushions and such, so that projects don't have to come to a grinding halt. But there's a lot of stuff that we were looking to Measure B to fund, and there's not enough money under the seat cushions to move everything and anything along. So right now, $0. Okay?
Thank you. Roland? Thank you, Mr. Lawson. And then we have Steve is going to follow Mr. Roland.
Thank you. So I think we have to keep the momentum here. Stopping is not an option. That's the end of that discussion. But the question is, where do we get the funding? Well, I'm going to give you a couple of alternatives. First of all, on Measure B, I think I made my position very clear. We can settle right now by removing the offending language that was inserted by VTA staff at the last minute. Very simple. Now, Measure A. We've looked under every cushion. Hello. I was at a meeting last week talking about a 2-mile extension of the light rail to East Ridge, which now has ballooned from $377 million to $453 million. Not bad for 2 miles. It's only just over $200 million a mile. And we just decided to add a little bit of funding there, another $67 million. You're never going to believe where that money is coming from. It's from the $70 million we've saved from BART Phase 1. And all of it has to go there in a grade separation that will increase the speed of the light rail from 35 to 55 miles an hour across an intersection. So that's one place where I would go and look. And quite frankly, moving forward, I think, and I'm going to go to MTC with this, the time has come to prioritize projects based on VMT. This is what we're doing with all developments. You know, if you're going to significantly reduce VMT, well, guess what? You get a priority. End of discussion. And the last suggestion I'd like to make, let's go to the private sector, and then we may or may not invite the VTA as we move forward, and follow the example of what Facebook did with Samtrans or Dumbarton Rail, and $1 million, and help out with a study, and hopefully not just get their money, but actually get the expertise instead of paying for VTA consultants going to come back with the same answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland. I know.
Are you calling me specifically, or?
Yes, Steve.
Okay, thank you.
And this is on not funding, but the SR 85 study.
I'm going to be talking about things I've heard people talking about already. First of all, in the study, when people said that they would take transit if it was within a certain percentage of the amount of time that they would spend on a car trip or vice versa, they weren't thinking about just being on 85. They're thinking about my origin point, which is probably sitting in their living room or kitchen or wherever, to their garage, to get to wherever they're going, whether it be work, college, shopping, house of worship, anything else. So the study says, or the question says, would you take transit if it was like, 25% longer? For the whole trip, not the little bit on 85, folks. Second of all, not all people use the full length of 85. So the study, it says that you can save so much time by riding the whole length of 85 on transit. Yeah, but most people just get on for a few miles. It's only part of a whole trip. If you really want to understand what people do or don't do, you have to go to the study. We have a living example right here, right now in Santa Clara County. We have light rail on Highway 85 from South San Jose going up to downtown and going over to Mountain View right now. And it uses 85 and 87. The light rail in 85 and 87 is totally underutilized. The car lanes are always full. And somehow we have this notion, let's prevent people from using what they want, which is driving their cars, and try to force them on light rail. Well, look at why they don't use it on 85 and 87 now. I think VTA should initiate a study like that. I'd like to say to the students, nice idea, guys, to support light rail. You're going to come up with the $4 billion for it? You're going to take it away from education? When you say I support something, understand how much it costs. $4 billion.
Mr. Levine, sir, address the board, please.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't facing this way. To the students, I'm just saying, where's the $4 billion going to come from for light rail? That's what they need to think about. Whether it comes from education or somewhere else. And again, I say, why are you trying to divert people from what they want to use, which is their cars? Provide them more car lanes. That's what they want, period.
Thank you. I believe people want options, and that's what we're working on. Okay,
They don't
thank
use
you.
options.
So, okay, that's, number 7 will be any further discussion from the directors. Otherwise, we'll move on to item number 8. Okay, number 8.
I have comments, but I think I'll save them for this, which,
For the funding one?
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, we've already dipped into this one a good deal, and this is a very short one-slide item. Just to set the timeline, it was May of last year when the Board of Directors agreed to advance $400,000 of Measure A money for Task 1. At the time, we were envisioning that in fall of last year, we would get a judicial decision well in advance of completion of Task 1, and that Measure B dollars would fund the rest of the work. However, even though we did get our decision in September, the litigant appealed it, and that has continued the lawsuit to this point. Our Measure B administrators are advising me that they expect a rather large window in which we can receive this judicial decision, perhaps as early as July this year or as late as the end of the year. That is well in advance of when we anticipate wrapping up work on Task 1. So, as commenters have noted, we are in line for a pause in this project until the Measure B dollars start flowing. And that's all I have for this item. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, we were going to take some questions from the board, and we'll go to the public, and then we'll come back for discussion and comments. Vice Chair.
Sure, so what other sources of funding have we looked at besides Measure B?
Well, Measure A has been the only funding tapped so far, using money that was identified for new rail corridor projects, of which we feel this project description, having light rail as an option, is an eligible use of those funds. But I don't believe we've identified any other funds.
I'm thinking of a lot of different things. So like Apple, when they did the Apple Campus 2, they ended up with over $1 million that was contributed to analyze stuff on the corridor. Was that money available, or has that money already been spent?
That money likely went to the city of Cupertino as part of a condition of development approval. It has not been an option that we've discussed.
So with all the development that's going on, Facebook and Google and the such, there are, and I'll use the term very loosely, impact fees or other stuff that's associated. Has there been any thought of trying to tap into that money?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair, if I could address that. Most of those developer fees are paid specifically to the cities for the purposes that the cities establish. If the cities wish to advance that money to VTA, we would be more than happy to work with the various city staffs to accomplish that end.
I believe about 6 weeks ago, didn't we pass a policy that would allow private companies to provide money to VTA? We changed a policy that would allow that, right?
That is a policy that is a work in progress. To my knowledge, there are no dollars associated with it at this point.
Okay, but I think we did change the policy. Have we thought about approaching the member organizations of this group for an advance on Measure B funds?
Consider this an ask.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at $200,000. So which staffs have you approached and what did they respond with? Because my staff's not been asked.
No, I'm saying consider this your ask.
So what would be the amount? If we could come up with 200,000, could we fund the next phase?
I would say, what is the actual dollar figure that we would need to move into task 2?
We're estimating $200,000 to $300,000 to complete task 2.
And so how much would you need to secure up front in order to move forward? Do you want 200? Do you want 300?
It really depends on the number of alternatives that the Policy Advisory Board comes up with that would affect the total cost.
Jeannie's rifling for her checkbook right now.
Let's get serious about this.
It is a serious question. That's why I asked it that way.
No, it is a serious question, and when you look at the members along the corridor who comprise this Policy Advisory Board, there seems to be a rather significant overlap with another body, which is Silicon Valley Clean Energy. And as we all know, we just, in that capacity, we just paid back our debt to each of the jurisdictions. And I don't know if the jurisdictions, having just cashed in on that check at the end of January, whether or not that is something that we can try and pull together and say, can we do a similar kind of thing where we are advancing money? Understanding that depending on the output of the result of the litigation with Measure B, we may or may not see that money back. But if we kind of looked at that and could we get all in along the corridor, divided by the number of members along the corridor, can we do that?
That's good. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, and if we're willing to entertain that as one of our options, how do we make that happen? Because I think that's direction either we give ourselves or is that direction we want to give to staff.
Seems like we have to give the direction to staff because they're going to have to figure out a little bit about what the program would look like and how it would come back together. Mm-hmm. And I think we could all bring it up with our own cities too. But since we're still in questions.
Questions. We're in questions, not discussion.
Right. No, but could staff just close out this particular one option?
If you got a question, go for it.
Would staff be willing to be the one who drafts the letter on behalf of the Policy Advisory Board that puts an ask out, which means there's got to be a little bit of work done to clarify what the money is used for and the terms and conditions on that, quote, loan.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a lot to be
So
talked
would
about how
staff
we get paid
would
and
staff
so
be
forth.
willing to entertain that?
Well, part of the reason for our presentation at this meeting is to hear the sense of this committee. If there is a sense of this committee that you would like to pursue advanced money from the member jurisdictions, we could make that ask for direction through the chair and get back to you. But as staff, we would like to know that this is a sense of the body.
Okay. Rod?
So I have a different question, and that is, do we have the authority at this meeting through the chair to make a request to the board to fund this? Because
What do you think? That was my question.
I would certainly hope so. Here's what Rod Dearden writes this morning. Seems it would be a serious waste of the prior study investment and an affront to the goodwill of the West and North County cities to stop the study. The cost of continuing the study is minor compared to the cost of stopping, delaying, and restarting the study. Doing the study doesn't depend on the availability of Measure B funds to build the selected alternative immediately. The chosen alternative can be built whenever funding is finally provided, so it's best to do the study as soon as possible to be ready. I hope that logic prevails. Now, the other thing to think about is...
Okay, we're here at questions, not comments. So do you have a question and then we're going.
Yeah, so
Okay.
my question is, could we produce a resolution or other communication
I think
of
the
with
chair
the
could
sense of
certainly
this
ask-
committee?
could certainly make that request. I would say it's going to be tough for the board to come up with that money.
So let me ask a different question. If 80% of the monies that went to, from Measure A of 2,000, including, here's what all of our voters received in 2000, promising the hope of light rail through the West Valley up to the jobs-rich cities to the north. If that was a promise in the year 2000 and 2008, between those two measures, 80% of the funding went to BART to San Jose. And now we've got all this money coming from having saved money to BART to San Jose, as one of our public speakers noted. And further, that we've already established that we can take Measure A funding to do Phase 1. Why couldn't the board consider taking Measure A funding to continue to Phase 2? $200,000? That's my question.
I do not have a definitive answer for you at this point. It would be very difficult for the board to do this, given the obligations for Measure A funding that they currently have.
Okay.
You may ask, I'm just trying to tell you what I think the answer is going to be.
Okay.
Don't shoot the
Even
messenger.
considering 80% of the money going to BART, even considering that every overage gets applied to light rail for East Ridge, even given all of that, you think it would be very difficult for the board to consider this request from this PAB?
Let me reiterate that the board's position as their number one priority is the completion of the BART project. Their number two priority, as indicated by the Board of Directors, is capital to light rail, to East Ridge light rail.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Do I have any other questions? Okay, so I had a question or two. So going back to Measure A money, and since Director Sink sort of brought up that it is in the privy, I mean, they justified $400,000 before. It's possible that they could justify more money coming out of there if there was a direction, if they wanted to.
I think if this were easy, it would have been done.
Okay. Well, yeah, we know there's nothing easy in transportation at this time. And we did, I got to watch my own lines between going into comments. If we reached out to the various organizations, the other people along at the SIA, how would the repayment be? Would it be based as, okay, you advanced us the money, as soon as the 85 Measure B money came in, you would be immediately repaid?
That would be subject to whatever agreement was negotiated between the source of the funding. Typically, a payment schedule is worked out. In this case, since the money for Measure B is being collected and has been collected since April of last year, I think I'd go out on a limb and say it could be repaid immediately.
Would the organizations have to form a JPA to lend the money collectively? Or would...
I don't think that's...
Okay.
You could. I think there's costs associated with forming a JPA that
Yeah, okay.
you might want.
I'm asking a question. And then also, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy name came up and seemed to have excess funds. Could they be interested in funding this based on, this going here, based on the idea that it would reduce greenhouse gases? And transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. So is that something that people in this room could say, okay, this is justifiable?
That sure seems like a question for that board.
Well, I'm just asking if this board asked that board that question, do you see, we're looking here for some money, $200,000, $300,000. So I'm just asking the question.
I honestly think that, well, I'll save my comments for later.
Okay.
I've already made my points.
Okay, we'll take public, okay, but it's not a rhetorical question. So, okay, Roland, you're up on number 8, please.
So So, first of all, to Director Miller's point, I am personally totally opposed to transferring any of the Apple money to this. The Apple money is dedicated to the Stevens Creek and I-280 corridor. That money should be used to study an extension of BART to Cupertino via Valley Fair and De Anza, and moving the BART maintenance facility to the permanent day quarry location. That's my position on that. And I don't want anybody to start wasting this money on BRT on 7th Street, please, okay? Do us a favor. With regards to the motion, you cannot have a motion because it's not agendized. And my recommendation to you is to actually put that item on the PAB as an item for you to vote on and forward to the board. Now, with regards to the comments about Measure A, what you were told is basically absolutely false, and as far as I'm concerned, the staff issues at the VTA that are going to have to be addressed sooner than later. The current scope for the extension to East Ridge is $370 million, and the recommended project with grade separation at Ocala and Cunningham is $453 million. Forget about this grade separation for now, okay? And maybe you can use Measure B later. And hello, we just got ourselves $17 million to play with and advance some of the Measure B projects. Now, last point on the private sector, you could actually do this on your own as a city or as a group of cities getting together without setting up a JPA. Use your existing transportation resources for, administration, and basically start working with the private sector, and let's just move this thing forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now we also have
And just for the record, the
Yes, ma'am,
comments
sir.
that were made, if I may, the comments made saying that the statements on Measure A were false, they're categorically untrue.
Okay, thank you. We have a distinguished member from the VTA, from the Council of Cupertino here, other than Rod Singh, Savita. And I will not take what Mayor Liccardo did to try to pronounce the last name.
The last name is Vaidyanathan, and I'm here as a resident of Cupertino, speaking primarily on my own behalf. I understand that the Measure B funds are in escrow, but there is an interest that's being collected while it's waiting in escrow. Is that something staff can consider putting towards this project? Thank you.
That is an excellent question. It has come up before, and the answer is, unfortunately, no.
What are those funds being held for then?
I'm sorry, say again?
What are those funds being held for, if they're being collected?
It's part of Measure B.
As of
It's
just a
all-
part of
it's
me?
all for the,
Okay,
the funds are collected in escrow, and that
Cannot-
includes any interest. The amount of the interest collected so far is a relatively small number, but all of it is relative to the delivery of Measure B projects.
Okay. And we have one more public comment from Steve Levine again.
Thank you. Roland already stole my thunder here, but having served on many boards and commissions, including VTA ones, the Brown Act specifies you cannot take any action on something that's on your agenda as an information item only. So all this discussion of sending a letter to whomever, just requesting funds from whoever, you cannot take an action here today. You're in violation of the Brown Act. Thank you.
Clarification from staff. Is a recommendation action or just?
You can make recommendations. This board is advisory to the Board of Directors, and as such, the chair may convey a sense of the board to the board members. I think in light of the fact that this is such a contentious issue, my staff recommendation would be that we agendize this for your next meeting, that there's an official action, and so there's no question about whether or not it's legal.
Okay. And our next meeting would be based on what we voted on today, okay? Yes?
I'm sorry, are you closing this item?
Nope.
Because, okay. I would like to continue the discussion.
That's, okay, we've closed public comment.
Okay,
Anybody else?
good.
Now we will come back for director's comments.
So, we can give direction to staff and to ourselves as well in terms of how we want to move forward. And yes, one of those options is to say we can agendize this at our next meeting. My concern is, I think what we've, the nature of our conversation is really wanting to maintain momentum. So if we were going, if this it was the pleasure of this body to look at agendizing this for our next meeting, I would ask that when we get to that agenda item, that we look at another meeting prior to May.
Other than May, yes.
But in the meantime, even on this particular item, I am definitely interested in trying to keep the forward momentum. I want to be very clear on that. Would rather not hit a pause. I'd rather continue making forward progress. We talked about a lot of different items, and I'm just going to say that my personal preference, while it may not hurt for the chair of this body to go to the board, as the chair of the ad hoc financial sustainability effort at VTA, and given that we haven't had our first meeting yet, I really believe that one's going to fall on deaf ears. Again, it doesn't mean you don't ask. Never hurts to ask, because the worst case that happens is you're where you started off from, right? However, I would like to think about looking at something that we have more direct control over, if this is really important to our cities and such, is whether or not we can look at taking this amount and dividing it by the cities on the roster here, and making the ask of our cities. Our cities meet more frequently, so it could get agendized sooner, and it could get a result or a potential, at least an indication, faster. So if we do have a meeting before May, we will have an indication as to whether or not that is a viable option for us.
So just to ask you one question on your thing, how would you divide the ask from the various cities? Per city or per population per city?
You know, I think that's an interesting question. I guess what I would ask is, again, we're just going to give direction here.
Well,
I would ask us to look at what would it look like if you just do it per city. When you look at the smallest city, I think is on this body is Montecito, to see whether or not that ask is too heavy. Who did the back of the envelope? Somebody had done a back of the envelope, right? How many cities do we have on this?
You count San Jose?
Yeah, you have to count San Jose. I don't know why they're not here, but.
No. 8, 9?
How many members do we have?
9.
9. Okay. So, I mean, it seems to be a pretty reasonable ask. So I would look at it doing it that way. I mean, I'm not sure I would do it by population. I'm just not sure we need to do it by population. But
I know Saratoga just received $1 million in grant money, and maybe they could afford $200,000 or $300,000.
I think that grant money is spoken for.
Okay. Mr. Sinks.
So I would take Rod Deardown's comments about this to heart. For a transit agency what's VTA's budget total?
The operating budget is about $400 million a year.
$400 million a year, and we're talking about $200,000. I mean, this isn't really about funding, is it? This is really about whether the majority of the board cares about this project or not. And frankly, right, having sat across the table with Jeannie and John negotiating these funds from Measure B, we really are talking about whether we're ever going to see VTA support effective transit in the 85 corridor. We know Johnny Camus wants to simply widen the freeway, and Stephen represents him well. But the rest of us actually think that it would be time to get some transit with 4 hours stop-and-go traffic each way every day. It would be time for us to move this forward. And if the board is basically sending us a signal that we're not worthy, it's not light rail that's the problem, because it's being built in Eastridge and Portland and Seattle and Los Angeles, but we're not even worthy of getting this study continued. I think we need to send a message back to them. So I would say to you, I mean, I sat in a rah-rah meeting with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group last Friday, and we're cheering on RM3 and BART to San Jose. Well, wonderful. Has anybody looked at RM3? All of the transit money is going to projects in San Jose, primarily BART. I mean, I get that we have opposition on this board to actually moving this forward. But I just want everybody in the public to know, and my fellow board members to know, that we need to we can have a long discussion about every city putting money in the pot, and gosh, that for us to get all of our cities in could take 3 to 4 months. Any one of us could write a check tomorrow and get this done, I'll bet you. But so I'm going to talk to my city manager about that. But actually, I consider this deeply disrespectful, that we've looked under all the cushions and we can't do this. So, I mean, frankly, that's where I'm coming from. And I'll give you a very specific reason why we ought to get this study done sooner rather than later. And this meeting represents the first day we're not moving forward on phase 2. So we're already slipping. So, last year, my city passed a transportation impact fee. We did a nexus study. We said anything that was a valid, studied project in our plans, bikeways, walkways, we could include those things in our transportation impact fee. Things that hadn't concluded formal studies couldn't. So, could I be collecting money this year from the likes of, say, a project at Valco, a project at the Oaks, other development in my city, based on a larger nexus fee, right, that would come when the 85 study is completed? I'd sure like to think that. But without this study being completed, we have no legal basis to do that. So it's very important in my city, if we listen to what some of the public speakers are saying, you know, we want to get the private sector engaged. We want to see if, as we're upzoning and doing other things development-wise, if we can really get money from some of these projects, right? It's very important that the study keep going without delay. So frankly, $200,000, you know, this is a symbol of the debate we had when we negotiated Measure B, and it's a symbol of the ongoing fight we're going to have to get this done. I just want everybody to be really clear about what's going on here. Thank you.
Director Milton.
Yes, thank you very much. I'll keep my comments brief. I try to take a pragmatic approach in things, and the key thing to me seems to be to keep the forward momentum going. And we've heard that mentioned a couple of times from Board Member Bruins, and Board Member Sinks read the comments from Mr. Diradon, which I think resonate very powerfully with me. To hit the pause button and then have to reboot things down the road is not something that I would like to see come to fruition. So in a pragmatic approach, I say to myself, I would have issues talking to Silicon Valley Clean Energy. I would have issues talking to where the Apple mitigation fees are, and the most direct approach that I can see would just be to talk to the cities. That is the same manner that happened with seed money for Silicon Valley Clean Energy. It's a model that's been used successfully before. Mm-hmm. Do we have to talk to all of the cities? I don't know if that's the case. Maybe a subset of the cities, fewer parties to talk to, not a significant amount of money to look at, and maybe a smaller number of cities chipping in a slightly larger amount from each city on a loan basis, hoping that there's a successful resolution to the litigation against the measure might be a way to proceed. Thank you very much.
Director Waterman.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a hard discussion with me. I think I'm probably the newest. I've been finishing a year, but it's also kind of frustrating, and I've talked to my two predecessors on this board in Campbell, and I think, as most of you know, I'm not the biggest fan of putting light rail in for a lot of reasons, but we don't need to go into that right now. I think it's difficult, as I said last time, in our cities, we're like Campbell, where we, you know, we're a little bit suburban. We don't have a lot of plans in our next general plan, even for a lot, which is coming up now, for a lot of urban villages. We do have light rail going through the middle of town, but it's not heavily used. And we have highways that are heavily used. So you know, we have a little sliver of 85 that goes next to our city, but there is a lot of high-tech development going on where Netflix is, and et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, we could have more input on it. My concern is more macro here, that you know, this becoming a little bit more of a debate society for me, and that's what others have said too, that it's, you know, I'm a CPA and I do taxes, and it's hard to have yet another meeting in the middle of tax season, that at some point we should have a goal as to when we're going to, pop the bottle of champagne and call this, call our task here done, and make a decision. And this idea that the funding is going to keep getting delayed and delayed, I don't know where that's going, but at some point, we barely got a quorum today, and it's going to be very difficult to keep jumping in on it. It's certainly not highest priority in Campbell right now to put a light rail or bus or something on Highway 85. I think we would cooperate, but I can't see a majority of us pushing to, write a check for $200,000 for something right now without a lot more definitive things on there. So that's all I can say for now. Thank you.
Yes, Director Miller.
So first, I just got to remind everybody, right, we're the Highway 85 Policy Advisory Board, not the Highway 85 Light Rail Board. And so while there are some here who advocate for specific solutions, we have not chosen a solution, and it has been our expressed intent to analyze all the solutions. Unfortunately, that's the very next phase of the project where we would have that list of alternatives and everybody could start to see what we're talking about. The point that we find ourselves at is really not very tenable. There were, a moment ago, 3 board members in the room. This was brought up at the last board meeting. No board member asked to agendize this for VTA's board meeting later this week, and it could have been brought up. So I sort of agree with Rod Sinks that it is a little bit disrespectful, because there could not be a person in that room that would not imagine that this group would not be upset for funding running out. And maybe nobody thought about it in that light, but it sure seemed like there should have been a discussion queued up at the board. This is really a question of priorities. And while they may have moved 60 some odd million to the light rail project from the savings of BART, had it been prioritized slightly differently, it could have been 60 something million minus 1 million, and they could have fully funded this project. In that they're not going to spend all of that $67 million in the next 12 months. There could have been other ways for this to come about. I should point out, in terms of priority, when the federal government came to us and said, our president's looking at infrastructure-related projects, does the VTA have anything? The VTA advanced 3 projects. One of those projects was Highway 85. So at least to the federal government, we are expressing that this side is of a high priority within VTA's overall list of projects that are in the unfunded category. So I would argue that VTA, while they do have a set of board priorities that include BART, finishing the BART project that we're on, and the East Ridge extension, I think this project has been put forward as a priority. I don't think that all the pieces have connected. For this priority to be fulfilled, there needs to be ongoing funding to complete this study. The ask of, we're talking about $200,000 to get another couple months, is probably not the right answer. We probably need to be trying to figure out how to get the money to finish the whole thing, because otherwise, by the time we could get the money from all the cities, we will have spent it and be stopped again. So I think we need to be asking the VTA board, and again, there's a member and I'm not even sure what Jeannie's title is, ex officio member, and Savita was here, who's the member representing the West Valley cities that I no longer see here in the audience. It seems like we have enough people to ask at the VTA board without going through any staff or anything to ask for this to be agendized at the following VTA board meeting, if I have your processes right. And again, I think it's really not a question of whether the money exists vis-a-vis the stability fund. I think it's a question of prioritization amongst all the projects and the spending plans that are currently underway. Can something else be deprioritized slightly to come up with another and I could be a little bit off, Adam, but about $1.2 million, which should fully fund this project to conclusion. And I would hope that our ask to each of us who serve in that capacity on the board is that you're in a position to be able to bring this up on Thursday.
Mr. Lawson, did you want to comment, or should I continue?
I think I owe this committee an apology. I don't think I conveyed the sense of the board as well as I should have in my earlier comments. I appreciate Mr. Sinks's passion. The Board of Directors has, of all of the Measure B projects, advanced money for this project. which is, I think, a significant step and one that I would urge this committee not to overlook. The fact that no Measure B money is flowing at this point was certainly not anticipated by staff and certainly not anticipated by the Board of Directors. At this point, it looks like the earliest we may see resolution, and we assume a positive resolution, will be in the fall. That is unfortunate, but it is certainly something that we do have to deal with. Staff agrees with Mr. Sinks and Mr. Diradan. A pause is not the right way to approach this. You all sit on city councils. You all know that funds get spoken for, and they get spoken for very quickly. There has been an advance to this project. At this point, the information that I have been given is that we do not have any additional funds that we can move forward. You can certainly ask. I don't discourage you from asking. I would suggest, from my perspective, that if there are alternative methods of advancing the money until the resolution of this, and the amount we should be talking about, I think Howard is absolutely right, is closer to $1 million, not $200,000.
Okay. So can I have my comments then?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, okay. No, Chair hasn't had a chance to comment. So, thank you, Director Miller, talking about light rail. As a city that has a light rail in it, and based on looking at item number 11, light rail has underperformed immensely. And so I concur that it is a misnomer that we are looking at light rail for SR 85, and I hope that it's...
We're looking, it's just one of many.
I know, but I am saying that I would rather, I see it hasn't worked, the ridership keeps going down, so I would not recommend light rail at this point in time. But that's being said, we are looking at ways to try to continue the funding. And I concur with everybody so far that said we need to keep the momentum moving. To sit back and delay this a year or so or more, it's just going to make congestion even worse because it's not going to get any better. We know that SR 85 is a parking lot, and the numbers are here. I have a handout that I would like to give you guys as we progress down to show you what the difference is between a Christmas break and regular traffic that Mr. Lawson was kind enough to provide with me, to show you that it doesn't take much to reduce traffic on this road, so anything is an improvement. When I read it, the study on item 11 and about how costly light rail is, it just amazed me that we are continuing on building a light rail extension to East Ridge. And Mr. Waterman, I concur that light rail is way underperforming. That we're spending that kind of money on a project that we know does not work through the valley. We know that ridership continues to go down. We know that if we looked at that, we're making a decision that is 20 years old, that things change. And due respect to Mr. Lawson and staff, that maybe the board may change its mind, and that if we bring these items up and we say this is what's important, they may find that out. And so I will recommend to the board that this council, this policy advisory board would like to continue funding for this, and that we will search and ask the staff to find any way they can give us additional dollars for this particular project. The sooner we get it in front of the board, hopefully the sooner that it's alerted to them. I also recommend that PAC, when they meet, that they bring it up as an item and recommend it. Or if PAC has any recommendations to various board members, that they bring it up beforehand so that we are aware that this is important to others. The board members have a lot on their plate. They're thinking about many things. So that's why we need everybody on board to give us their thoughts so that we can bring it up. And I will definitely bring it up at the Thursday meeting as a board member. But I think staff has a good understanding that we do not want this to stop, that we will pursue asking for more money, and as we go into the next item, then we could discuss about regendering it. So if there's anything that I haven't covered that sort of sums up what this Policy Advisory Board would like to do, we're going to move on to the next item. Oh, Mr. Waterman.
Yeah, just really quick, I mean, it's just my concern, because the last meeting, we didn't have enough people for a quorum. This one, we barely do, that we've got to be really careful. We're not just having a meeting just to continue the flow or whatever.
No, I understand. It needs to be productive.
Yeah, otherwise let's wait. And if it means we're going to go 6 months, without a meeting, we're going to go 6 months. It's very difficult, I think, for all of us. I didn't want to make it sound like it's just me to take 2 hours out of the middle of the day to have a discussion we've all had quite a bit of time now.
Well, maybe we might need to change the time of the meeting. So I have the board secretary question. When you sent out the polling, what kind of a response did you get?
Heard from everyone who's here. Heard from San Jose that they would not make it. Heard from everybody who's here that they would attend. Heard that San Jose would not attend. Did not hear from Los Gatos or Monte Sereno after numerous attempts. Caltrans,
Okay.
Mr. McElhenney had said he would attend, and
Okay,
he's not
I was
here.
just looking more for the voting members. Okay, so
Yeah.
then maybe the chair might have to do some outreach and discussion to get people here, to your point. Okay. Mr. Sinks, did you have a closing comment before we move on to number 9?
Yeah, I think it would be important for us to agendize a formal vote at the earliest possible.
Well, that was number 9.
And
just wait, let's go to number 9, and then we can set the meeting, and then we
well,
can do that.
just in response to your comments, I understand why light rail has a bad name in this valley. I would simply invite and I actually think it's more likely we're going to get a decent bus rapid transit guideway. That seems like it may be a better fit in our circumstances. Okay. But I would say to you that we should be open-minded, because light rail, 4 new lines built in Portland, new lines being built today in Seattle, and also in Los Angeles. The problem with light rail here isn't the technology. The problem with light rail here is it was built in the wrong places with stops that are too close together. And frankly, when it gets to downtown San Jose, it turns into a street trolley. It's running at such a slow speed.
Rod, I appreciate your comments.
So
we were on funding, and so you're going a little bit off
I
that
know,
time.
but
And I
you're
brought-
talking about why light rail is not a feasible option, and I would simply, I just wanted to respond to that. So
Okay.
that's all.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
We will go on to
Mayor.
item number 9, unless it's real pertinent.
No, I'm still on. I want to make one. I would hope that we would ask and we would look at doing 3 things in parallel right now. As staff being here, having them looking one more time in terms of, if it's a timing issue and such, is there a way for us to find some money so that it can be done, much like they did for task 1. I would ask that our board representative go for group 2, and that you look at getting support from the West Valley as well to look at raising this at the board meeting. But 3, I would ask those of us that are sitting here to also engage in a discussion with our city managers and such, because while I agree with all the sentiment that's being made, okay, this is important to us as well. And so, you know what, I think instead of pointing fingers both ways, I think we need to look at how far we're willing to go as well, and trying to understand, because I know what my city manager's, authority is. So we can go in, and I think we should be looking in parallel. You can each have a private discussion on that. And if you have some miracle and all, I think that should be passed over to staff to say, you know what, this is important. And if these other things fail, this is what we're willing to do. Okay? Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here at our meeting in September trying to figure this thing out. So again, if we don't do parallel, May is not that far off, and when you look at the lead time, I would say, can we do all 3 in parallel, please?
Okay, sounds
Could
good.
I ask just one more question on this? If VTA isn't willing to do this, could an independent study be conducted by cities of interest, major employers, others who might say, Or would that not qualify then for federal funding because it wasn't done through the VTA? Do you
Well,
know that?
my concern is, I did not hear from VTA, and maybe I'm being deaf on this subject. I'm not hearing that VTA has any interest in killing this project. I think if it wasn't a matter of money, we would continue to be moving forward. They have a clear plan of the way they want to go forward. So I don't believe it's a motivation issue.
Okay.
And again, I think, have we shaken it out far enough to see if there's additional money? So if you think it's a motivation issue, then that's a totally different problem. But it's not the problem that I'm interested in solving right now. My problem I'm interested in solving is money to move forward.
Issue.
Okay, guys, we're going to close discussion. We're going to go on to number 10. No, we're done.
All right.
Number 10, please.
9.
9, sorry. Well, I was, I'm moving you a lot faster. Oh, okay, I can't read. Number 9,
What's
timing of
before
our
you
next
is-
meeting.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. What's before you is the proposed schedule for next year. I hesitate to say this, but to address the motivation issue, we recommend that you schedule these meetings because we believe that funding will be found. So I will now quietly slink back into my cave and wait for your comments.
Okay, before us is the SRA 85 Quarter Policy Advisory Meeting Schedule. Adam, any comments?
The only other comment I would make, Mr. Chair, is that it is far easier to schedule these meetings and then cancel them if we cannot have them, to Mr. Waterman's comment, than it is to try to establish the meetings. We strongly recommend that you adopt the meeting schedule, and we also believe that staff is well motivated to continue working upon this project.
Thank you.
I don't have any comments other than
Okay.
to note that the chair always has the discretion to add additional meetings should that need to happen.
Okay.
Move approval.
Second. You got a speaker.
Okay, I don't have a card. No. Okay, before we go, okay, so I have a motion and a second. Do I have any discussion?
Would you consider an amendment to add a meeting? That we call for a meeting about a month from now to see where we're sitting on funding?
I think the chair always has the discretion of making that request, and I can
Well,
assure you
I'm
that-
asking if we could put it in the motion. Sure.
You can make a motion and see if it's seconded. Then
Well, no, we have a standing motion. I'm asking.
So you're just asking whether or not we,
Yeah.
with the understanding that the chair always has prerogative. So are you asking for the chair to schedule a meeting in approximately 1 month? I'm trying to understand, because they have the prerogative to do so, but are you asking him to take action?
Given the energy in the prior topic, I'm thinking it would make sense to conduct an extra meeting. Because we're talking about our meeting schedule, so.
I think you're proposing scheduling it
So are you?
in the event that it would be needed.
Yes.
Can you give a more, so are you
You can
looking
make
for
a
something
motion to
in
schedule
early
it.
April?
I'll second it.
Is that fair? Early April?
Early April, it could be, yes.
Okay, so if I were to understand you correctly, you would like me to amend, you're suggesting I amend my motion with asking the chair and staff to look at scheduling a meeting in approximately early April.
April 2nd or thereabouts, that's a Monday.
Okay, April 2nd or thereabout.
When's the April meeting for the VTA board?
April 2nd happens to be a Monday.
I guess I don't have a problem with putting that in, that we're asking the chair, with direction to chair and staff, to look at putting in a meeting in the early April, such as April 2nd timeframe.
So the board meets on April 5th.
And the board meets on April 5th.
Would it be wise if we went to April 9th after the board, so we had some kind of discussion?
So there's no board meeting between now and April?
No. 'Cause-
There is, but it's this week, and so what's on the agenda is on the agenda.
Oh, I
Okay.
see. And
Okay,
only one meeting in March.
So I will amend my motion to look at adding in what's there and adding in a meeting either in early April, whether it be the 2nd or the 9th, and let chairs and staff's discretion.
Does the seconder accept?
I think that you're off by week 2nd, 9th, or 16th.
Okay, how about by mid-April? How about that?
Then I would be happy to second.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that clear, staff?
Okay, we have public comment, so we have a motion We have a second. The motion is to accept the action items and accept a additional meeting in April. We have a public comment.
So very briefly, my recommendation would be to go to bi-monthly meetings instead of every 3 months. And then as many of you have pointed out, you can always cancel meetings. It's not an issue. Now, with regards to timing, I want you to be very clear on what the situation is with the Measure A funds that are in surplus. This has not been approved by the board right now, this appropriation. This is purely a staff recommendation that will go to the board. Right now it's scheduled for May, for the May board meeting. Staff are recommending actually presenting to the board at the April meeting. My advice to you is at that board meeting, you basically deny the notions, and then you can have $70 million on the table for people to decide what they want to do with. Thank you very much.
Okay. Public session closed. Any further discussion? Seeing done. Vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes that we go for April, mid-April. Okay, we go on to item 10, hypothetical transit travel speed analysis.
Okay, so this will be a series of presentations on questions that have come up from the Policy Advisory Board over the past 2 meetings. We think that diving into these issues, some of which were at your request, others will just help give a better background to how transit works, transit performance, transit costs, and be informative for the task 2 when we get there of developing project alternatives. So we looked for this task at how quickly various modes could get down the corridor, specifically comparing light rail and bus. We were interested in seeing whether each mode could perhaps be more competitive for riders traveling along the corridor and what some other advantages might be. I'll note that we built our light rail assumptions here on our existing operating condition in that we have a top speed of about 50 miles per hour, that the trains reach mid-segment, that we slow down to 35 miles per hour per California Public Utility Commission requirements when we pass a station that is not being served. That's what happens in the express portion of our route on Highway 87. And we also spend about 30 seconds at each station to pick up and drop off passengers. For the bus side, we are imagining that in a dedicated guideway where there is no spillover traffic coming from mixed flow or carpool lanes, that we would be able to maintain a top speed of about 65 miles per hour. We do not have a situation in our current system where a bus is flying immediately adjacent to a stop and not picking anyone up, but we are assuming that it's probably a good safety practice to slow down a little bit, so we're adding the 35 mile per hour speed, and we're also assuming a similar dwell time at stations. The boundaries for this analysis were 101 in the north, where it meets Highway 85, down to the Santa Teresa station, or roughly where 101 meets 85 in South San Jose. And this is all hypothetical. We developed multiple stopping patterns to give a sense for what different types of services could do along this corridor. Local stops would make every single stop. We're imagining 16 as that is what our engineers imagined when doing their constraints analysis. These would be at major cross streets. It is possible that we may want to look at some sort of express service similar to Caltrain's Baby Bullet that only hits high ridership stops. That would be something like the major stops pattern where half of stops are observed. And then we also looked at a super express pattern, which may not be the most practical, but is in there to give a sense for what the top possible or lowest possible travel speed is, essentially the floor in our service here. And one of the things that these stopping patterns speak to is the balance that we struggle with in designing routes between ease of access and speed of the service. The more stops you have, the slower the service travels. The faster it is, perhaps the more appeal, but the less possible origin and destination combinations you have. A summary table that's included in your memo shown here. We've also included driving for 3 different times of day, off-peak, which would be midday, the off-peak direction, or weekends, where we observe travel speeds through our INRIX data that we presented at an earlier meeting of being around 65 miles per hour. We also have included driving based on what our INRIX data showed for the AM and PM directional commutes. You can see how those are considerably slower than any of the transit options that we looked at here. Graphically, and you have a large 11 by 17 handout of this, this is basically how quickly those routes go along the corridor spelled out in a chart. The vertical axis is time. The higher up along the route that you go, the longer it takes to get end to end. Flatter segments or more horizontal segments are where the vehicles are traveling quickly. The more angled or vertical a segment is where it is traveling slowly. You'll see that in the blue and green are where our light rail and bus alternatives are. I'd like to remind you that based on our survey that we did and discussed at a previous meeting, asking folks if they would use transit, we found that folks are very time sensitive, that about 2/3 need a service that will be in the same time that they take to get to their destination or less time in order to use transit, with a few willing to go 25% longer, but then once it's 50% longer, very low, and then almost 15% saying that they would not take it no matter what. So the thing to consider here, and this was brought up in an earlier comment, is that the time spent on transit is not the entire time of the transit trip. It starts when a person decides they want to take that trip, the time it takes to get to the station, waiting for the vehicle to arrive, and then the time accessing their destination from their destination station. What we are concerned with is how time competitive all four of those times together can be with driving. And we also note that, of course, travel time isn't the only consideration that people have when deciding whether to use transit. Gaining productive time, spending time in the presence of others, privacy, the access to a vehicle throughout the day that you would have if you drove, are also factors that affect that decision. But that is the speed analysis that we did. Happy to take any questions.
I do have one.
Okay, board questions? Director Sinks?
Thank you. So if we go back to the chart of the nodes, the 8 of 16, it was back a little ways.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. And you talked about moving past stations at 35 miles an hour if you weren't going to stop there. So what I was rather wondering in your analysis is whether you posited that there were 16 stations and you had to slow down to go past each one of them, or if you were posited that there were only 8 stations in the major stops pattern.
I chose 16 stations as that was the number of stations that our engineering team came up with in doing their constraints analysis. This is all hypothetical at this point, as we will select the number of stations and locations.
So what you're saying is the total time it took in the major stops pattern accounted for the fact that there were actually 16 stations and you had to slow down.
Right.
So a really interesting question for me, having studied this a bit, is to ask you, what would happen if there were really only 8 stations and the vehicle didn't have to slow down? I mean, I recognize that local service is great, but in the freeway corridor, we don't put interchanges everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And we do controlled access, and if we're really looking at something which has high benefit as a commute service, wouldn't it make more sense to, I don't know if 8's the right number, but really try to cut down on the number of stations and say, look, the first mile from your home in the morning, right? We're going to figure that out with probably some private shared vehicle, to be honest. So leave the car in your garage, push a button on your phone, ride with 3 of the people on the way to a transit hub. That's 1 of 8 on this corridor. Ride up on a fast ride to, say, Mountain View, and then have your employer handle the last mile connection as needed. So I'm wondering if you could refactor this study with that in mind, or if you can speak to that.
I can always do the calculation and come back with it, although I'd estimate that it's probably in about the 1 to 2 minute time savings if you were to simply only have 8 stops and serve just those 8 stops.
You think 1 to 2 minutes is all we'd save? Because I would think if you were, if you had to get down to 35 and then you had to accelerate again, that might be a big deal, but you're thinking not so much.
Probably not so much, given the
Okay.
range of all outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it sounds, from what you're saying on the survey, that the number one thing is the amount of time it takes, let's just say if you're commuting in the morning to get to work and in the evening to get home. And I don't know, I mean, I'm always thinking whenever I've done these things, it's your last slide, which is all these things, and we talked about this last time, that I would call convenience things, that, you know, being able to get home if there's a family emergency, being able to go out to lunch with friends that might be a couple miles away, yada, yada, yada. So I'm willing to spend another 20 or 30 minutes in the morning and evening. To me, that would be less critical than the issue of, okay, now I'm at work. Do I have to ride a bike? Do I have to call Uber to get places? And there it's in the middle of the day when there's no traffic, boy, it's nicer to have a car. So I don't know if there's a way to get that sort of unknown intangible there and compare it, you know, and then see what people think. Obviously, if you have no choice, which I think a lot of, if you say New York City or something, you don't have a choice. You have to take the subway system, and I was in Beijing last year, you have to take the subway system or whatever it is. You don't have a choice. You don't have a choice, but people do have a choice here, and as we talked about last time, things aren't so bad during most of the day. They're just peak periods. I don't know whether, it's a question if there would be a way to poll people on this about how much this inconvenience weighs versus, you know, the fact that I have to spend another 15 minutes in the morning. And maybe there's no way to measure. I'm just sort of asking it and hoping there's some kind of answer.
I think you make a good point there. We know that there are multiple sensitivities that people respond to when they choose mode choice. Things like convenience, having a vehicle in the midday versus speed. And everybody really exists at a different point along the spectrum of tolerances for each of these aspects. I suspect that when we get to the third task in our work here, and we have a series of alternatives that we have compared, and we go out and do another survey of the public, we'll get some pretty informed responses that should give us a good sense for whether the services we've imagined have an appeal to users.
Are you done? Oh, okay. Oh, that's okay. Question?
So, I missed the last two Policy Advisory Board meetings. My apologies. But refresh my memory in terms of what is the distance we're talking about when you look at this. So we look at this segment going from the Santa Teresa station to US 101 North. What's the mile?
It's
what's the distance?
about 23 miles end to end, although we should note that the trips that occur on Highway 85 are a series of overlapping patterns with varying distances. So assuming that one person would save 20 minutes over driving by going end to end is really probably a small segment of the travel market. Everyone exists in various places, and you have a series of tables attached to this item that kind of get into the specific point-to-point travel times.
Well, so I appreciate this exercise that was done. It just kind of brings to my mind, I'm hoping that when we're looking at this, that we're really trying to come up with a transit solution that would actually work, that we're not looking at, at some point we've got to start thinking of one of our speakers during public comments was the De Anza student, who really says, start planning for a future generation or the existing generation, but and future versus looking backwards and such. And so, I would hope that we would never consider something that has in a 23-mile segment 16 stops in it. That just seems like that would be such a bad design if you're really designing for transit. If you're designing for transit that every driver says, oh, it's for somebody else to take, well, that's a whole different story, right? But I'm really hoping that we're when we get into task 2, which we will be shaping in terms of what we want in that study, and then into task 3, that we need to keep ourselves in check as to how serious we are in terms of trying to find a transit solution and trying to understand what's going to make a transit solution work or not work, because it doesn't have to pick up every single person. It's got to pick up a huge number of people, though. So I appreciate that, and I actually applaud staff for doing this with, I don't know, to me the 16 to me is a worst-case scenario. And then looking at doing it as, just randomly grabbing a midpoint of 8, and then that end to end. So I think it's kind of is a graph that we will have in front of us, I would
Is there a
hope,
comment or a question?
when we start going forward. Okay, so thank you.
Okay.
I got the answer to my question, and I wanted to comment on us with our next task.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to keep comments at the end.
Actually, I do have one more question.
You have
I do have one more question. I'm going to ask it.
That's okay. Go ahead, ask the
I'm
questions.
going to ask it on this one. So when we're looking at all of this, I'm one of these that are really trying to move toward how you can get to a cheaper, faster kind of thing, or even a pilot as quickly as possible kind of mentality. And I know it doesn't always work, but one of the questions I do want to ask is, have we done any analysis or something about what if we were to utilize the median shoulder as it kind of sits today? I know the Highway Patrol is the biggest opponent to doing on the right shoulder with all the on and off ramps, okay? But have we looked at what it would take, because other jurisdictions are doing some sort of pilots. I don't know if anybody is doing a pilot of the median shoulder. And have we taken a look at that?
Well, a pilot of the median would be difficult, as you really have to build the stations in order to serve them.
The reason let me rephrase. We today have an express bus on 85 that is stuck in the same traffic as everybody else, okay? And so I think I don't know if we're continuing to see any improvements in ridership or whether we've hit the ceiling on that right now. So even if we were looking at short-term relief, have we looked at whether or not that's a possibility, where it may be an interim step that would allow us to try and get more out of the express buses? Because I think the express buses is an opportunity for a learning.
I will have to check to see if the median shoulder is affected by the bus on shoulder. Currently, it's not legal in the state of California to operate a bus on the shoulder. And I'm unsure if the median shoulder applies or if that's just the right side shoulder. So we can look into that.
Could I follow up on her question? There's pilot programs being proposed all over the place. Would it take the state legislator to authorize a pilot program, or could the VTA board authorize a pilot program?
The issue in front of you is a subject of state law and would have to be changed by legislation. There is currently authorization for a couple of jurisdictions on a pilot basis, to perform bus-on-shoulder operations. There is a bill that is currently active. I don't remember the number right now, that would give authorization to Santa Clara County. That bill did not do well last session. I don't know that it's going to do any better this session, but we shall see. I think Jeannie mentioned that part of the challenge was, and it's not the Highway Patrol, it's the Highway Patrol Officers Union that opposes bus on shoulder.
Okay. If you have an opportunity, could you forward me that bill number?
Yeah, I will certainly do that.
Okay, I have a question. So on slide 5, that one, yeah. So with other non-time related factors to be measured and analyzed, such as access to transit stations, destination waiting time for transit costs, parking costs, and perceptions about transit during the alternate analysis, can we really do this? I mean, is this the type of survey that would answer that question?
I think it's probably the best way to get that information. I know there's data out there that talks about how different riders are affected by different sensitivities, but I've yet to see any sort of aggregate analysis. It's probably best off doing a survey of users in the corridor to figure that out.
Okay. So if we gave them an option, people would use it? If they build it, they will come?
It will depend on their personal tolerances.
Well, I mean, if you got 30, 60, potentially, I mean, how many of the 2,500 survey, how many, the 30%, the last same time and 25% longer? Was there a number related to that set of percentages?
That puts us up around 75, 80%.
Yeah. So it's just 85. Okay, you answered my question.
That's a lot of people, actually.
That
A lot
would-
of people driving today, isn't it?
That would support it. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, we do have,
No, but I would like to, we have the president of the Cities Association. So Chair McAllister asked for the bill number. I would also like to ask Mr. Sinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're a kind of a working body here, that we look at bringing that before the Cities Association as well, to try and figure out whether or not we want to try and get behind that.
So Jeannie, I really appreciate your idea. I think we ought to be using all means possible for short-term relief. If we had a guideway, right, that had the ability to keep going and didn't have to get off at exits, it would be obviously much, much more effective. But even short-term things we could do to let buses, maybe of all stripes, go up the shoulder or the median would be terrific. I mean, we'd have to actually have it swept, but I'd be happy to take that, as president of the Cities Association, I'd be happy to take that to the Ledge Action Committee.
you know, when I look at this board, we have a lot of people, hands in nothing. I'm going to go to a TMA for North Bay Shore right after this meeting.
Yeah.
So if we start doing our touchy-feel with everybody, we might get some stuff going here.
No, I really appreciate the great idea.
And Saratoga with money, $1 million. Okay, so can we, any more questions? Otherwise, we'll go to public comment. And then, thank you, Adam. For item number 10, Roland, would you like to speak on this?
So this slide, basically it tells it all. Over 50% of the people will take transit if it took either the same time or less time. That's the bottom line. But I've got some issues with the data that you're being presented with. On slide 7, the top speed of the light rail is not 50, it's 55. And that's how I know. The speed through passing stations used to be 35. It is now 45. The dwell time is not 30 seconds, it's 15 for a light rail. But what gets more interesting with the buses is the VTA. It's true, the top speed right now is 65, and that's because I clocked them at more than 65. They used to do between 70 and 75 on Highway 880 and 181, and I was really happy about that. And now they do exactly 65, because that's the low. But if you follow Google or one of the other shuttles on Highway 101, they're doing between 70 and 75. They're actually running much, much faster. That's because they're private and they know they can get away with it. On the stopping patterns, I would say none of these. That goes back to the example I gave, during public comment. And by the way, I work for free. I'd be happy to give you a presentation on the actual stopping patterns. But what they've got, it's essentially is a super express with massive stops on both ends. This is what it looks like. And if you use this movie tab, you can actually map them and see where all the bus stops are. Also, moving forward, I think we should stop talking about bus rapid transit and mixing that up with express buses. They're completely different animals. What we're talking on the 85 corridors is express buses, not rapid transit. Now, stations in the median. Why? There are no stations in the median of the freeways in UK, and Google and everybody's happy peeling off. And right now, the VTA is going to shut down all the parking areas that they're using to pick up the passengers.
Thank you, Roland. Okay, Jim Sutton.
Hi, I'm Jim Sutton. I'm just a resident here of Saratoga and wanted to come in and have a couple of comments. First of all, just in seeing the last presentation, I think we're significantly underestimating the first mile and last mile problem. And so I think that the things about the time in the last presentation from getting end to end is very much underestimated with respect to those things. For me, for example, even if I took Uber, which, well, it would cost me about $15 to do that, I know from experience, and would take me another 25, 30 minutes. So that's added to, that's my first mile, okay? And then I add to it the VTA transit time, whatever that may be, And the same thing at the other end, because I'm not employed, I'm retired, okay, so I don't have Google to come pick me up at the other end or whatever. So I think that we're really underestimating that problem. And underestimating the time and cost of Uber. I would note, just an unrelated comment, but to some that were comments that were made here, is that I do read the LA Times fairly regularly, and I note that the light rail in LA is of declining ridership, just like VTA light rail is. So I wouldn't consider that a success story. I'm concerned about VTA light rail for other reasons, mostly having to do with cost and time. I agree with all the comments that were made by various people about the sightseeing tour of downtown San Jose if I want to get from Campbell to Mountain View. And I could walk faster than the train goes. But also, the actual out-of-pocket cost to taxpayers is something north of $20 for that trip. Okay? And that's just unreasonable. We can't afford to keep doing this. And we can't afford to encourage more and more people to go there and pay $20 each.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Have me pay $20 each.
Jim,
Okay?
thank you.
I guess that
Your
must
2
be the
minutes
end,
is
huh?
up, yeah.
Okay.
But you are the Jim that I know.
I am the Jim that you know.
Okay. I recognize the voice. Jim and I go back 40 years, ski patrol. Okay, come back for comments now. Howard?
Sure,
Oh, wait a minute. Did I have another one? Okay, I'm sorry. Steve? I got to allow the public.
First of all, I'd like to clarify something that Member Singh said. I do not represent Johnny Camus here. He's his own person. I do not represent anyone here but myself. Could you go back to the slide that shows the end-to-end travel times, please? And I thank Adam for all the information that has been prepared here. So I like to know the end-to-end travel time, the numbers, the slide. Yeah, okay. I'd like to emphasize again that most people don't go end-to-end on the corridor. I would guesstimate that probably people travel on average maybe a third of the length of the corridor when they're using it. And according to the chart, people might save theoretically 15 to 30 minutes by using some form of transit on the whole corridor, but on the third that people use, it might be 5 or 10 minute savings. But it's a lot more complicated than I just started my house, I call up Uber, I get to transit, I get off, and it takes me to work. You have wait times for every one of those things. You call Uber, it's not the same as going to your garage and taking your car out. You gotta wait. You get to 85, they drop you off, you've gotta walk a certain distance to get to the transit service. Then you wait again, because if the transit's running once every 15 minutes, on average you're waiting 7.5 minutes. And if you're only saving 5 or 10 minutes in theoretical time in the first place, you basically lost all your time right there. And then you get to the other end, you gotta walk to find the thing that's gonna take you to where you're trying to go. Then you gotta wait for that thing there. It's not that simple. And if you people use transit, you'd know it's not that simple. Every time you use transit, you wait, you transfer, you wait, you take another mode of transportation. There's a lot of wait time there. And I guess that's mostly the point I'm trying to make. You're not gonna meet the people's alleged needs that they showed in the other chart that Adam had. They want something that's faster than what they can do. This is not going to be faster. It's not going to be the same time. It's going to be much slower, and that's why people don't use transit. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Make sure, did I get everybody out on the public comment side? Okay, coming back to council for board for comments. Director Miller?
Sure. I want to thank staff for bringing back answers to some of our questions. At this point, a lot of the data is obviously based on hypothetical scenarios. Until we come up with actual scenarios, we won't know where the chips fall. I think that it is very interesting for us to start thinking about how the various stops and stop times, numbers of stops impact, and to some degree, sort of the magnitude of impacts that some of these decisions will have. Because when we get to real scenarios, it's those trade-offs exactly that are going to show up in the charts. So again, I view this data as very illustrative, though not definitive, and I look forward to seeing this sort of data presented again when we come up with real scenarios. And again, I just remind everybody that I don't feel like we've made a decision as to a mode of transportation. We are just getting ready to start looking at the modes of transportation, and these will be some of the data sets that we'll be utilizing.
Thank you. Anyone? Director Wetterman?
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Director Miller was saying. I think sooner than later, we should start this political exercise of, I know everybody says, well, we need less stops, but I think we tried this last time, and if we start saying no to Winchester, or no to Bascom, or no to Saratoga, or no to Lawrence Expressway, or no to El Camino, it's not going to be possible, and pretty quick I'm afraid your 16 is probably going to turn into 24 before we know it because of political pressure. So I think we need to know that if indeed it is going to be 18 and we're not going to be able to limit it to 6. This has nothing to do with bus versus light rail versus whatever. I mean, in the end of the day, they need stops, and if they need stops, and none of us are going to be able to say no to our various jurisdictions, and that's going to be key. That's going to make this a long thing. So I would like to see sooner than later that we go forward with the process of what we can leave out. So thank you.
Okay. Madam Director, any comments? Okay.
So, as I mentioned when I asked questions, I would appreciate seeing it, and wondered about the comments that Roland had about the top speed for light rail. If we're really going 50, could that be factored in? If we're really transiting through stations today at 45, if that could be factored in? If the top bus speed is actually higher than the study indicated, I wonder if that combination of things plus elimination of some stops, with all due respect, if we get 16 stops on this busway, I'm really concerned that, I mean, to some of the speakers saying, it won't be timely enough, I think that's what it's going to be. And I'd rather see us have an effective regional service on the corridor that works, rather than do yet some other thing that has way too many stops and doesn't, therefore doesn't garner the ridership. So I think, VTA did a study last year of the next network, and basically it said, look, you have to concentrate service. It has to be fast and frequent, and if it isn't fast enough, people just won't use it. So we've talked about reverting service to significant corridors where we can really focus attention. I think the 85 corridor ought to be among them, but I think it has to be done differently than we've done light rail in the past, right? If we have the stops too frequently, it's just going to poke along. And so we've got to be prepared to figure out how to make whatever vehicle of choice we put in this guideway really move. So I would appreciate what you might do to produce some recalculation of the numbers, given some of the input we've heard, and, what are real world conditions out there for transit rather than what we're imagining with speeds and all. So, and I'd be prepared to talk about less than 8 stations on the corridor, actually, from where I'm sitting. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll finish this up. This chart in front of us says bus, light rail. Well, those are only 2 options, and hopefully we come up with 2 new options, aerial guideway or whatever. That would just totally blow the speeds off the record. So that's what hopefully we'll get to. I also concur with Director Bruins and Director Waterman, and that people forget that we're trying to do an express. We're trying to move transit, particularly in the morning and afternoon. And that's why we saw the amount of energy, time, greenhouse gases, people just sitting in traffic. And so we need to move bodies, and we can't do it with 16 stops. We may not be able to do it with 8, but particularly during this morning peak and afternoon peak, we need to move bodies. And if we do something in between, that's fine. But to me, that's what our goal is to do. So we need to look at the other stops and make sure that the park and rides are available. I know we're possibly saving some lands, but this is great data. I think this is what Director Miller has been asking for 2 years now, and I think we're getting the information that helps us make those decisions. So thank you. Okay, so go on to number 11, please.
So I'll take a moment to note here that I think we're at 11:55. oh, too far. To note that we're coming up on the end of, I think, our scheduled time together. I understand that some of you have other obligations, and each of these next two items could take as long as the last one if we spend the full time on them. So I want to make sure that I'm using our time to the best interest. Are we good with moving into this next topic?
So, Chair, can we, I'll say, given that we have 5 more minutes, either can we have staff just go through both presentations, one right after another, very quickly, and because they are information, could we do that?
Yeah, I have no problem doing that, and as long as the staff is willing to answer questions offline and follow up on this information. But we do need to give time for the public to speak on those particular items. So run through them.
Sure.
I think a lot of those, again, goes
Okay, so
thoughtful speed.
I will go as fast as I can. Previous meeting, we talked about light rail and bus operating costs, and I think there was some surprise as to light rail being considerably higher than bus on an hourly basis. We did a peer comparison, looked at 17 other agencies that operate both bus and light rail and also employ union labor, so you will not see an agency like San Diego in here. What we found is that universally, light rail costs more to operate on an hourly basis than bus, but that is probably just one consideration. We should also think about the amount of subsidy that is required to move each passenger. In some cases, light rail can be more cost-effective at moving people than bus, providing you have the right conditions. There are many, many reasons for why light rail service levels can differ, among them ridership. One of the big things to point out here is that the size of rail infrastructure is a surprise for a lot of people. The more miles of track you have, the more you have to maintain, as well as the overhead catenary. That fixed cost is what really weighs down smaller systems or systems that have low levels of service or very long miles of track. I've got a comparison in here between VTA and Boston, where we are at basically opposite ends of the spectrum. You can read about this in your memo. I'd rather not dig through it. Suffice to say that Boston is really maximizing their light rail investment with high levels of service, high ridership, multi-car trains, and coming in with a very low number of all the peer agencies in terms of cost, despite having a labor cost that is on par with VTA's. Also, just to highlight 2 quick points in this comparison, the top table is our light rail cost and the various components. The bottom is the bus cost. If you look in the right column at the top 2 values, you will see that on light rail, the maintenance requirement, almost 60% of our total operating cost, and only a quarter going into operating the service, which is to say mostly drivers. It's pretty much the reverse on the bus side. About half of our light rail maintenance cost is that track, and half of that 60% is our track and catenary maintenance. So that's a real fast agenda 11.
When you come back to us in April, could you find aerial guide weight costs? Or something that's out there right now that possibly you could give us some costs on that one?
I can look.
Okay,
yes.
Thanks.
The final item, which is one that we'd wanted to address at our previous meeting, which was the rate of... Oh.
I'd like to talk on number 11.
I can speak on 11 and 12.
Okay. We'll keep moving.
Okay. Corporate shuttle operations. There are a number of tech employers that operate corporate shuttles to bring their employees to the office in the morning, to home in evening on the corridor. One consideration is, what if those vehicles are allowed in whatever guideway that we come up with? What's the potential to move people? Unfortunately, these companies are extremely secretive about how much they spend on service, how many people they carry, even where their routes go. So the best we can do is to spy on them with video cameras. We placed cameras at 6 locations along the corridor and counted vehicles that came by. We did this looking at 4-hour peak periods in the morning from 6 to 10 a.m. and then a 4-hour peak period in the evening from 4 to 8 p.m., as well as looked at what was achieved in the peak hour, which was the busiest hour by location. What we found is that generally volumes are higher the further north you are in the corridor, with El Camino Real having the highest. However, it decreases down when you get further north to Middlefield, which tells us that a lot of the vehicles are leaving the corridor at that point. Similarly, the further south you go, the fewer vehicles you see I liken this to something like a piece of rope that is fraying at both ends, where there is a common segment around El Camino Real, perhaps McClellan Road and Middlefield, but lower volumes at other places. Here is our peak hour. The same pattern holds, except the numbers are a little bit lower. And so we, in doing our best to answer the question of how many people could we move if we allowed corporate shuttles to use this guideway, we have to make a lot of educated assumptions about how the corridor is being used. Some of the key things to point out is that half of the vehicles that we observed are likely carrying no passengers. Because this is a completely directional service, bringing people to work in the morning, home in the evening, half of the vehicles you see are probably returning back to their starting point to do another run, carry more passengers. This is an inherent inefficiency with peak period directional service, one that we see on our light rail system. We estimate that these shuttles cost about $250,000 a year per bus. That's an 8-hour shift for about 255 weekdays of service. We estimate that operators spend about $12,000 to $15,000 per rider per year, which is no small sum. This coming from industry observers who have projected figures in this range. And our best guess is that at that cost, at that total cost to operate a bus, that the average vehicle is probably having a ridership total that falls between 16 and 26 riders on peak direction trips, and that number probably grows as you get closer to the destination because these vehicles are making stops along the way. So our summary table here of our best guess for how many people are being carried by these shuttles at particular points shows that it is in the low few hundreds, nothing comparable to what a lane of vehicle travels is able to accommodate, but still quite a bit of people in a small number of vehicles. Again, I'd like to note that we are stepping way out on a limb here and projecting these numbers based on our own intuition as a transit operator and what we've heard. If these are incorrect or off, I would love for a company to come forward and tell us exactly how they're doing. And just also for final reference on the last slide, I took a handful of our express routes that do a South San Jose to Northwestern County trip pattern and found that our boardings are roughly comparable with those that we get using the industry projections and our own observations, that our cost per boarding annually are also mostly, with the exception of Route 185, fall into that $12,000 to $15,000 a year-ish range per passenger carried. That's my last slide. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions?
So,
No comments, questions.
My questions go, trying to understand the metrics in your memo and also this last chart and the prior one. I don't know, if you're committed to finishing this meeting very quickly, maybe we ought to, I'd be happy to make remarks if these two items were re-agendized for the April meeting, because I do have a number of questions
Yeah, no, I think
that are substantive.
Yeah.
And in the meantime,
That'd
I'd
be
certainly
good,
seek,
because this goes back to the data
Yeah.
collection that will help us make that decision on what project and the number of stops, so.
I think this is really great work as a starting point, and, actually, it'd be great to have some time to digest it.
Okay. So we definitely have an April meeting, I can see right now. We got at least 3 topics going on that. So if everybody wants to hold off on their re-agendize, so we're going to re-agendize item 11 and 12.
Yes.
As
Okay?
well, of course, as the funding item.
Plus, well, that's part of the funding thing. Okay. Now, just a quick comment is that I noticed a lot of people are getting off in El Camino. I would speculate that they're going to the transit center, and that's why they're not going further north.
That is entirely possible. As I note, we don't have any actual data from the employers to verify that.
Okay. Well, I'll be seeing some, so hopefully I
Or
can
on
have-
237,
Okay. And okay. Roland, would you like to give us some comments? Pass that down. One of those to Jane.
So to the comment that you made earlier, I think all the information that was presented today was extremely useful in terms of guiding you towards focusing as we move forward. You've seen that over 50% of people who currently take Highway 85 would shift to transit if they had a solution that was at least as fast or faster. 50%. We know that the light rail is slower and it's more expensive than buses. We also know the cost of a guideway, because you just got to look at the East Reach extension, which is a guideway for 2 miles. It's $440 million. So it's $220 million a mile, which is twice the cost of high-speed rail, by the way. So I think at this point you've got enough information at the April meeting to basically say you're not going to be considering light rail, you know, in this phase, especially bearing in mind you've only got $300 million, and you're going to be focusing on a transit lane, and easily they're going to be on the left, on the right, and you're going to make it work. One point I'd like to make right now, I was in Tracy and looking at state rail plan. They were showing 40,000 people coming from the south and hitting us every day. And we can assume 20,000 of these people are going on Highway 85, the other 20,000 are going on 101. We just don't know. But the fact is, the VTA is always focusing on light rail and bus solutions. Well, what if they focus on the Caltrain solution from Gilroy, and maybe we could get rid of 20,000 or even 10,000 people? You know, that's 5 lanes, you know, 10,000 people, 5 lanes for 1 hour. And the last point on the shuttles, San Francisco figured out exactly what the shuttles did 2 years ago. And I've been to the VTA over and over again. Why don't you do what San Francisco do and actually understand what it does? You know what? I was at Spur last month. They had the presentation of the TNC. San Francisco is the first city in the nation that's got a full understanding of where all the TNCs are going. By the minute, there was nobody from the VTA at the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll close public comments. We will close these items. We'll re-agenda them. So I will go to announce.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair,
Yes.
just before you close, if you do have, the board has any comments on these 2 items, please send them to us, and we'll get answers for you for the next meeting. So any comments or questions you have, please send them to us in the meantime.
Okay. I just had a quick announcement. So I handed out to the board members a chart that Mr. Lawson provided to me that showed during different dates in December, holiday period and non-holiday, and you could see during the non-holiday, if you ever drive on it, the traffic flowed freely all the time. Great.
Sure.
And so just look at the numbers between the two, pick the hours, and you can see it's not a lot of, well, percentage-wise, but it doesn't take much to open up traffic on that and relieve congestion. So our goal is put that out there, to think about it, to say, hey, you know, if we can get something going, maybe it's not such a big task to reduce that traffic congestion. So that, thank you, staff. I think everybody on this board was very thankful for all the data that we were looking for, and we are adjourned until mid-April.